I'm Adrian, the cruise and travel guy. Cruise lines are abandoning Melbourne, and next season we'll see a reduction of over 26% in the number of cruise ship visits. So what's happened? Who's to blame? And will cruise ships eventually return to Melbourne? Remember, when it's time to plan your next cruise or holiday, head to my website first, where you can search, compare, and book. While Melbourne and Sydney often trade blows over which is more livable or has the best cafe culture or dining, there's one metric where Sydney always comes out on top, and that's its attraction to cruise lines. Arguably one of the world's most beautiful harbour cities, it remains a top cruise port in Australia, and that's despite its limited cruise port access. Melbourne, on the other hand, has a well-connected, fairly centralised international cruise terminal, yet it's being abandoned in droves. Melbourne has become unattractive to cruise lines. That's the bottom line. As for-profit businesses, cruise lines are seeking the biggest return on their investments. To that end, Australia as a whole is seeing a widespread reduction in cruise berth capacity. I have a playlist dedicated to the state of Australia's cruise industry linked below, but in a nutshell, we're an expensive region to operate in, with lackluster infrastructure and a problematic currency for, in particular, American headquartered cruise lines. Essentially, it's much easier for cruise lines to make a lot more money in places like the Caribbean and the Mediterranean. In late 2023, the Victorian State Government announced a rate hike that would have more of a hit on the bottom line of cruise lines. In the tariff schedule published by Ports Victoria, it was noted that an across-the-board increase in the fees and charges of 15% would come into effect for vessels utilising Station Pier, Melbourne's primary international cruise terminal, from January 1st, 2024. While port fees and taxes are generally paid for by the passenger, this increase occurred with such minimal notice that cruise lines had no choice but to wear that cost as a loss. In early December 2023, Chief Strategy Officer for Carnival Australia, Teresa Lloyd, said, "Our economic benefit to Victoria is immense, and we appreciate the importance of maintaining our ports, but to be expected to carry a 15% increase with no notice is unreasonable." At the same time, Carnival Australia expressed its willingness to work with the Victorian State Government to find a workable long-term solution. In December 2023, Virgin Voyages was busy launching its first ever Australian cruise season. The then infant cruise company made many mistakes when it came to its Australian launch. I've made a video about that you can watch linked below. But in relation to this rate increase, a Virgin Voyages spokeswoman said, "We encourage the Victorian Government to consider the unnecessary obstacles and barriers that the increase in fees and charges at our home port will have on our business and others." Based on the maximum passenger occupancy numbers of each cruise ship, during the 23-24 summer cruise season, Melbourne saw just under 250,000 passengers arrive over 128 ship visits on 34 cruise ships. During the 24-25 summer cruise season, 32 ships visited 103 times, representing a drop in capacity to around 185,000 passengers. In 25-26, those numbers are set to decrease again, becoming 28 ships visiting only 76 times and bringing with them roughly 116,000 passengers. That's a reduction in potential passenger numbers of over 50% in just 3 years. For a state government that had in its sights the increases in fees and charges to better help it maintain its cruise terminal, it sure missed the mark. Taking into account the 2024 site occupation charge of $36.06, which is the fee levied against each passenger visiting Station Pier on a cruise ship, and excluding all other port levies and charges, the Victorian State Government stands to make around $4.2 million in the 25-26 cruise season. Compare that to the roughly $7.6 million the state government would have raked in during the 23-24 cruise season, and the more than $6.5 million it would have received during the 24-25 summer cruise season, and the downward trajectory is almost laughable. This is only one specific example, but a reduction of over 50% in the passenger numbers will have a greater impact on both other private sector businesses and the state's greater economy. In the financial year ending 2024, Clear says that cruising contributed $637 million to the Victorian state economy. Despite notable objections to the increase from the likes of Virgin Voyages, Carnival Corporation, the state government opposition, tourism leaders, and even cruise lovers like you and I, the Victorian state government persisted with the increase, and the industry responded by significantly reducing its presence and capacity in the state capital. If anything, this is just the beginning. As reported in the Herald Sun by Mitch Clark, Tourism and Transport Forum Australia chief Margie Osmond recognised that Australia works best when all of its components work together. This is made all the more true by the fact that we are so isolated from the rest of the world. One bum part kind of affects the entire system. Virgin Voyages pulled out of Australia after its single season. Cunard's Queen Elizabeth recently wrapped up its final Australian home port season, and P&O Australia's Pacific Explorer has left our waters altogether, quite possibly having the greatest impact on access to cruising outside of Sydney and Brisbane. In Sydney, $46.60 is levied against cruise lines for each arriving passenger, about $10 more than is charged for passengers arriving in Melbourne. But Sydney isn't Melbourne, and it remains an attractive and desirable city from which cruise lines want to operate. Compared to Sydney's overseas passenger terminal, Melbourne Station Pier is a relic of the past that has received minimal investment. Putting aside location, it pales in comparison to even Sydney's White Bay and Brisbane's purpose-built international cruise terminal. It really seems like the Victorian state government continues to view the cruise industry with short-sightedness, ignoring the more than $500 million economic contribution it made to the state's coffers just last financial year alone, a number that will continue to decrease substantially going forward. Even in saying all of this though, I do believe that cruise lines have taken advantage to a degree of Victoria's decision to increase its rates and fees, using it as an excuse of sorts. Nationwide, the industry has been retracting, and frankly, it was going to with or without Victoria. The proof is in the concerted efforts of both South Australia and Western Australia, with each state government doing its best to attract cruise lines and its associated economic windfall. As vocal as cruise lines have been against the Victorian state government, they've remained very quiet when it comes to responding to calls from South Australia and Western Australia for more cruise ships there, so not everything is always as it seems. There's no doubt that the cruise industry will eventually rebound, and hopefully at that time, cruise lines look to ports and cities outside of just Sydney and Brisbane. Do you think the state can turn things around, or is it too late? Let me know in the comments. And a quick shout out to Gavin and Cherry. Thanks so much for watching. I do appreciate your support. And as always, thank you to everyone for watching and following along. If you haven't done so yet, you can give me a follow on Facebook and Instagram at The Cruise and Travel Guy. That's where I publish all of my travels and trips as they happen. Of course, on here on YouTube, you get all the nitty-gritty details, but over there you can kind of follow along. If you're looking to book a cruise, head to my website first. And again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon. I'm Adrian, the Cruise and Travel Guy. Arguably the world's most beautiful harbour city. Arguably one of the world's most beautiful cruise harbor.